Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Okay, guys, surely. Cool, yeah, a mega projects video on Hadrian's Wall. Nice history and engineering mix.
You buy Surfshark. Safety and security online are critically important, and you can protect yourself online with Surfshark. Get 83% off and 3 months for free through the link in the description below.
All right, I know that it was used to separate Roman Britain from non-Roman Britain, like kind of modern-day Scotland, England boundaries. But wasn't it built on top of a smaller pre-existing wall? Let's find out. All right, let's learn. Let's go.
While the title of Great Wall quite rightly belongs to the 21,196 kilometers worth of stone strung across China, it is rather modern compared to what we're talking about today. While the earliest sections of the Great Wall date from the 7th century AD, much of the most recognizable parts were built from the 14th century onwards.
Guys, the whole wall isn't disconnected, right? There are some gaps. I think he said that.
AD, much of the most recognizable parts were built from the 14th century onwards. But in this video, we're diving all the way back to a wall that was started in 122 AD at the very limits of the mighty Roman Empire. Hadrian's Wall runs for 117.5 kilometers, that's 73 miles, from the River Tyne on the east coast of England to the Solway Firth on the Irish Sea. Today, it is little more than a small wall, often no more than waist height. But in its day, it must have been a forbidding sight for the wild tribes to the north that the Romans had attempted to effectively shut out. This was by no means the first major wall of the ancient world. The walls of Jericho predate Hadrian's Wall by over 8,000 years, while the Theopetra Cave Wall in Thessaly in Greece dates from an astonishing 23,000 years ago. But when Hadrian's Wall was constructed, it was entirely unique in that it didn't defend a single city as many Roman walls did at the time,
it was more of a
rather
fence.
acted as a lengthy border wall. The Romans never built anything else quite like it, with one possible exception. You see, Hadrian's Wall was not the only wall that the Romans built across Britain. There was another, smaller, little known wall, and I'll tell you all about it a little later in this video, but let's get into it.
So I think I was
Romans
wrong.
arrived in Britain in 43 AD. We certainly know they didn't come for the weather or the food, but rather for good old-fashioned Roman conquest. By that time, the Roman Empire had enveloped almost all of modern Western Europe. The fearsome Germanic tribes had managed to hold off the Roman legions, with much of present-day Germany still outside of the empire. France, or Gaul as it called itself back then, had been overrun, and now the legendary Roman army stood on the coast of France, eyeing, I'll just assume it was a clear day and you could see England from France for poetic value, their next target, Britannia. But this was not the first time that the Romans had sailed across the English Channel, and it would not be the first time that the Roman legions had locked horns with the Britons.
Guys, it seems like a sort of strange, like, why even bother? Like, you already have so much land as it is. A lot of it is not, like, you're only creating more land that you have to defend, right? It's not like England was something that would, if you conquered it, would make it much easier to get somewhere else. And so that's a little, so they just really wanted to conquer as much land as they could, not just solidify and hold what they had, which is interesting.
Julius Caesar had invaded Britannia in both 55 and 54 BC and installed his own king, a man by the name of Mandubratius, along with a series of client kingdoms which were tribes that were aligned with Rome. But the Romans themselves withdrew back across the Channel and into mainland Europe. Things then remained relatively calm until 43 AD, when Roman Emperor Claudius instructed his legionaries to cross the Channel, this time for good. The main forces that had been assembled to defend Britain were soon routed routed by the well-trained Roman army, who soon turns their attention to what is modern-day Wales. Things were not as straightforward here, and the Welsh put up a fearsome resistance, but eventually it too was pacified. But not for long. With her fiery red hair billowing behind her as she rode her chariot defiantly at the Roman lines, Queen Boadicea is a name that has gone down in history as a true British folk hero. The wife of a recent...
At first, I thought that she was like a legend. I guess she was a real person, obviously. But I remember learning about her. I think it was a biographics video on Boadicea, and the biggest thing I remember is that they had done they had a lot of victories, and they were confident, I guess, even like so confident that they brought like their family caravans with them, but they got routed and disaster, right?
Has gone down in history as a true British folk hero. The wife of a recently deceased Celtic king, Boadicea was cheated out of her late husband's will as the Romans forcibly removed her and her children from the land after flogging the queen and having her daughters raped. Her response? Well, that was to lead a thunderous revolt against the Romans. Perhaps caught off guard, the Romans were overwhelmed at what has come to be known as the Massacre of the Ninth Legion. It's thought that as many as 80% of Roman foot soldiers died in the battle, after which Boadicea's army swarmed across Londinium, now London, Verulamium, St. Albans, and Camulodunum, Colchester, killing 70 to 80,000 people in the process. It was unbridled savagery, but it has done little to dampen Boadicea's heroic image. Boadicea and her army were eventually defeated, with the queen taking her own life, either through poison or her own weapon, we're not sure. The rebellion was ruthlessly crushed, but the Romans had been given a painful lesson of just how problematic the British tribes could be. It would, however, be a group further north that would cause the biggest problem of all.
Classic.
Anybody who's ever seen Braveheart will know that the Scots are a formidable foe when crossed. Combine that with the beautiful yet incredibly harsh landscape of the Highlands, and you begin to understand the difficulties of completely conquering an area like this one. By the end of the 1st century AD, the Romans had pushed up into modern-day Scotland with a series of defensive positions. Now,
so the Scottish went from fighting the Romans to fighting Vikings to fighting the English, just nonstop, just having to defend.
Occupying the Scottish lowlands. A series of military engagements, which unfortunately we don't know much about, occurred in 105 AD as the local tribe, known as the Picts, fought back ferociously against Roman rule. It appears that the Romans made a tactical withdrawal at this point by moving further south and establishing a new frontier at Staingate, an important Roman road that ran across the country, roughly at the point of the modern border between England and Scotland. In 120 AD, Hadrian, the new Roman emperor, set out to tour his great dominion, and upon arrival in northern Britannia, he ordered a great wall be constructed at the point of the Staingate Road. Now, you can't build a massive Roman wall around your computer, but that doesn't mean you can't protect yourself online, and that's where to...
If this interests you, Surfshark, make sure to use the links and everything in the description.
Surfshark comes in. Do you use the internet? Well, of course you do. Do you have personal information that you'd rather remain personal? Well, who doesn't? The internet is all kinds of weird. There are people out there who want to ruin your day, they want to take your details, steal your identity. There's a real thing, and it's a pain in the ass. Surfshark has HackLock. This searches databases for your passwords, which sounds like a bad thing, but no, Surfshark are the good guys. If they find your details, they'll let you know. You can change your passwords, and boom, you're back in the warm comfort of safety. And while you're in that warm comfort of safety, maybe you're like, let's watch some Netflix. I want to watch The Hobbit. That'll be brilliant. But watch this, it's only available in the UK, and I live in Seoul, South Korea. It's a bit of a bummer, but wait, Surfshark will fix that right up through the magic of VPN technology. Boom, very sneaky, now you're in the UK, and you can watch all The Hobbit you want. And then if you're like, oof, The Hobbit was fantastic, I loved it, I want to go to New Zealand and see those Hobbit houses. But what's this? I'm getting outrageously high prices because I searched for the flights twice. Well, don't worry, fire up the VPN, get a new IP address, and those prices will hopefully, not a guarantee, but might happen, they'll drop back down.
Wait.
Surfshark's also totally unlimited, so if you want to download that Hobbit movie in raw 8K, if you got some sort of epic home cinema, go for it.
I'm not going to pause
no
and
logs,
comment
great support,
and go on
and a
something
30-day money-back guarantee if you don't
ad,
like it. Get 83% off and 3 months for free through the link in the description below, or just use my code MEGA. And now let's head back to Britannia.
Yeah, this is my question. Very much so.
While the reason for building the wall might seem fairly obvious from the outset, it is a point that is still debated among historians. It's easy to assume that the wall was built simply to keep out the rebellious Picts.
I wondered about like the invasion of Britain as a whole too. Like, is it vanity or
the north? But logistically, it was a huge ask, not just to build it, but also to maintain it. Some have argued that the wall served more as an expression of Roman power and prestige, and was perhaps never meant to be the impenetrable wall we've long assumed it was meant to be. This was certainly an awkward time for the empire, with rebellions in Egypt, Judea, Libya, and Mauritania, all a world away from the windswept north of Britain, but no doubt the Romans were fearful of mass uprisings. Another theory is that it was built to control migration more than anything, but again, that's a lot of work and a lot of stone for a glorified border. It was also very different.
what if it was like a maybe not, but like, hey, like it kind of could, if you were from Scottish and or just native Britons at the time, I don't know if you want to call them Scottish, might kind of be like, okay, if there's a wall there, then maybe it's like, all right, this is my side, that's your side, so you wouldn't have to, like, it's a clear distinction of like, if you don't come over here, we won't fight you. And so it could be as like a deterrent of just like, hey, we're not trying to go much further than this, so chill out on the fighting sort of thing.
Different to other areas around the empire where fixed boundaries were rare, or perhaps it was to do with taxation, a way of charging people to cross.
Sorry, let me go back 10 seconds.
For a glorified border. It was also very different to other areas around the empire where fixed boundaries were rare, or perhaps it was to do with taxation, a way of charging people to cross back and forth, which certainly did happen in other parts of the empire. The truth is that we just aren't exactly sure why the Romans decided to build their only major large-scale wall project, which didn't protect a particular city in the north of England. We believe that construction started on Hadrian's Wall in 122 AD and was completed at a fairly brisk pace in just 6 years. The wall was built from east to west, with all of the Roman legions in the country taking part. Slightly to the south was the Staingate Road, which had been constructed 30 years prior and almost certainly played a key role in the logistical support for the whole project. Along the road lay several forts which would have protected those constructing the wall. It seems that initially the idea was to have 80 small gated markas or fortlets every Roman mile. That's 1.5 kilometers or about 0.9 miles today. This would be interspersed with pairs of evenly spaced intermediate turrets used for observation. If we want to be pedantic, the fortlets, which would have likely housed a few dozen soldiers in each, were often over or under the designated distance apart, most likely down to landscape features or...
Just curious, if anyone can answer, if anyone knows, do you, like, what if it's a North Korea, South Korea situation where it's like, all right, like we've been fighting a lot, let's, just put it here, and any records of any sort of agreements are just lost. So it seems like not enough of a defensive structure to be full on just for defending against armies trying to come across, and almost looks a little bit too much if you're just trying to mark a boundary, but that doesn't mean it wasn't a boundary.
Under the designated distance apart.
That doesn't mean its only purpose wasn't a boundary.
Soldiers in each were often over or under the designated distance apart, most likely down to landscape features or where signaling would have been obscured. The majority of these Mar castles were built from wood and earth, though the turrets were made of stone. These turrets lay roughly 493 meters apart and had an internal area of 14 square meters, slightly smaller than your average parking space. There's also an interesting quirk in that they weren't all uniform. The same. 3 different Roman legions took part in the construction: the 2nd Augusta, the 6th Victrix, and the 20th Valeria legions, and we believe that this resulted in slightly different designs and inscriptions. These were not enormous differences, and much of them centered on the orientation of the doors, but also the thickness of the walls. The north-facing wall was always the thickest, but archaeologists have found 2 separate measurements for the width of the remaining walls, either 0.76 meters or 1.1 meters. Why was this? Well, we have absolutely no idea. Much of Hadrian's Wall was built using local limestone, except for the stretch west of the river Irthing, where turf was originally used before being replaced by sandstone at a later date. This was most likely down to a lack of materials, which does sound a little strange considering the power of the Roman Empire, but this theory is supported by the fact that the wall narrowed considerably after the North Tyne River from 3 meters to 2.5 meters, with certain parts as narrow as 1.8 meters. This has led historians to refer to the two sections as the Broad Wall and the Narrow Wall. The foundations had, however, been constructed to the Broad Wall specifications, so the wall must have had a slightly wonky look to it. The main wall itself was around 4.6 meters high and was initially constructed with a clay-bonded rubble core and mortared-dressed rubble face. Had a slightly wonky look to it. The main wall itself was around 4.6 meters high and was initially constructed with a clay-bonded rubble core.
It's way higher than I thought it.
And mortared-dressed rubble-facing stone.
That's crazy, actually.
Constructed with a clay-bonded rubble core and more.
So this was 15 feet? Okay, that is much more impressive. Okay.
Mortared-dressed rubble-facing stones, which is a technique still used today to give the impression of an old worn stone wall, but it seems that this technique made it vulnerable to collapse and it was frequently repaired with a mortared core.
Vellum? I love just green English fields like this. It just brings me happiness looking at it. I don't know.
Another interesting aspect from the area comes not from something that was constructed, but rather excavated. Standing to the south of where the wall ran, it's impossible to miss the extensive ditch that follows the wall line in both directions. Known as the Vallum, this earth rampart stretches practically from coast to coast, hugging Hadrian's Wall all the way, though exact distances vary from directly next to it to as much as 700 meters away. The purpose was almost certainly an extra line of defense, though intriguingly, it again remained completely unique throughout the Roman Empire and along its borders. The ditch is roughly 6 meters wide and 3 meters deep with a flat bottom. On either side are two mounds about 6 meters wide and 2 meters high, around 9 meters from the ditch itself. It's generally accepted that there would have been certain crossing points, probably close to forts, where bridges would have been placed across the Vallum.
Question, guys. Is this to block some sort of like siege type weapons? Or I feel like with foot soldiers, this wouldn't be that. Well, this is what it looks like now. Maybe it was a lot more narrow, and I don't want to say like, oh, it couldn't have been that hard to cross while I'm sitting here, 21st century. So I'm wondering just what the main purpose was. Clearly, it was a successful idea since it's used a lot. But yeah.
Around 9 meters from the ditch itself. It's generally accepted that there would have been certain crossing points, probably close to forts, where bridges would have been placed across the Vallum. It seems that the Romans were not against the odd change of plan along the way. Not long after construction had ended, around 128 AD, it was decided that 14 large-scale forts would be added along the wall, each of which would house between 500 and 1,000 auxiliary troops. However, it seems that a number of them were built directly over some of the Mar castles or turrets. Whether this was down to a misjudgment in the defensive needs or simply a reorganization, again, we just don't know. Very little remains of these forts today, with a few exceptions. One built around 124 AD, lies close to present-day Bardon Mill in Northumberland and has been associated with a variety of names over the years. It was also close to a small civil settlement where the ruins are still visible today, including the so-called murder house where 2 skeletons were discovered beneath the floor, laid well after the construction of the building. Another of the better preserved forts is Salernum, located within the grounds of the 18th century country house Chester's. This was a particularly important fort as it housed one of the Roman cavalry units, as well as guarding a bridge across the North Tyne River. Today, you can still walk through what was once the baths, the barracks, the officers' quarters, as well as the outposts. A church nearby includes 4 columns that look remarkably Roman-like, and sadly, this is often what became of Hadrian's Wall and its forts. Much of the stonework from the wall itself was used for roads during the 18th century, and the Salernum was even purposefully covered up during the same period for landscaping and design purposes, before a descendant reversed the decisions and the fort was revealed failed once more. Lastly is the fort at Vindolanda, again near to present-day Bardham Mill, which remains in not only remarkably good condition, but was also the site of one of the most exciting discoveries in Roman Britain. Roughly around the size of a postcard, the Vindolanda tablets are a set of wooden leaf tablets discovered in 1973 on the grounds of the Vindolanda fort. At the time, they represented the oldest surviving handwritten documents in Britain and covered a huge variety of topics, from the construction of new forts to an invitation to a birthday party held in 100 AD.
Really? Is that Latin? Or
an invitation to a birthday party held in 100 AD.
I love little things like that that give you, that remind you that these, I feel like oftentimes we like to see ourselves as like the main character of history because we're in the present, right? Like, oh, it's present day. When everyone thought that way, and it's stuff like that like mundane stuff about personal life that really immerses you. It's exciting. It's nice. Nice. It's amazing.
Emperor Hadrian died in 123 AD and was replaced by Antonius Pius, who apparently wasn't satisfied with the current wall arrangement. He ordered that a second wall be constructed 160 kilometers to the north, which became the Antonine Wall. The 63-kilometer wall ran from Old Kilpatrick in West Dunbartonshire on the Firth of Clyde to Carridon near Bowness on the Firth of Forth. This was a turf wall built upon stone foundations that roughly measured 3 meters high and 5 meters wide. It came with 16 forts built along it, as well as the curious Arthur's Own, believed to be a Roman temple in the shape of a beehive, which is sadly no longer standing. The reasons behind the Antonine Wall are a little mysterious. We can presume that it was constructed to help placate
It's like, I want a wall too. Go build it.
Reasons behind the Antonine Wall are a little mysterious. We can presume that it was constructed to help placate the tribes further north, but it's clear that it provided far less protection than the much better built Hadrian's Wall to the south. The Antonine Wall took 12 years to construct and was abandoned just 8 years after its completion. This wall garners far less attention than Hadrian's Wall, probably for the simple fact that there's not much of it left, but it was still quite an achievement. If Emperor Antonius had planned on pacifying the northern tribes, he failed. The next emperor, Marcus Aurelius, abandoned the Antonine Wall and spent considerable time strengthening Hadrian's Wall instead. Over the next few centuries, there was little change.
Was that just a vanity project by Antinous? It seemed like, I mean, from all the evidence, that it wasn't as well built. I'm not saying it has to be as well built if it's further north and it was more spur of the moment, maybe. I don't know, but it was abandoned, and then Marcus Aurelius is just like, no. It was probably just a failed venture, but it would be. I like to think that it was a.
On several occasions, Roman
he just wanted it.
legions marched north to flex their muscles, but it seems that this line more or less remained the extremity of the Roman Empire for around 400 years. That is until 410 AD, when the Romans departed Britain. The causes of this were wide-ranging, from barbarian invasions to military coups, as well as a general economic downturn. The empire was in complete disarray, and Rome itself was sacked in 410 AD. Over the next century, it would split in two, and by the end of the 5th century, the mighty Roman Empire was but a shadow of its former dominant self. As I said at the start of this video, Hadrian's Wall struggles to match the Great Wall of China. We don't see the hugely impressive towers or the huge, almost intact walls that wind through the hilly landscape. Hadrian's Wall requires much more of an imagination. Some of it still remains, but you need to stretch your mind to see it in its full glory. This wasn't the first ancient.
Again, you guys have so many of these. I forget the reason for it. Most obvious is like the Giant's Causeway, I think, in Northern Ireland, but so much of your geography or rocks look like they're in these vertical pillars, like stacked like spaghetti, dry spaghetti. Interesting. I wonder the
wall to be constructed, but it was the first
geology
of its
video.
kind to run for such a length. The fact that nearly 2,000 years later you can still walk beside it from coast to coast is a testament to the extraordinary building work done by the Romans. Standing beside it on a windswept, chilly day, you can imagine the Roman legionnaires who did exactly the same thing nearly 2,000 years before, staring north into the great unknown and wondering if the fearsome Picts, naked and with blue paint covering their bodies, would appear. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe. This video brought to you, of course, by our friends at Surfshark VPN. There is a link below with a special
Really
deal.
cool video.
And thank you for watching.
It's a bit late. It's almost 10 p.m. But I felt like watching a video. Really interesting. Would appreciate any answers to any of my questions, or hope you learned something alongside me, maybe. And I'll see you guys next video. All right. Bye, guys.